The millionaire was paralyzed when he heard the waitress singing a song in the restaurant, the same song his beloved used to sing before she disappeared 10 years ago. Jared Whitmore adjusted his cufflinks, his gaze drifting absent-mindedly over the elegant dining room of Le Chateau, one of the most exclusive restaurants in New York City. The soft clinking of crystal glasses and hushed conversations blended into a sophisticated atmosphere, the kind he had grown accustomed to over the years. But tonight, something felt off. He had come for a business dinner, yet his thoughts were elsewhere, locked in a past he had spent a decade trying to forget, or rather, trying to solve, the mystery of Alexis Carter, his fiancée who had vanished just days before their wedding, leaving behind nothing but questions and a gaping wound in his chest. Jared had done everything. He had hired the best private investigators, combed through every possible lead, even entertained theories that ranged from a tragic accident to something far more sinister. But after years of dead ends, even he had been forced to accept the inevitable. Alexis was gone. And then he heard it, a soft, melodic hum weaving through the restaurant, threading itself into the air like a whisper from a forgotten dream. His pulse slammed against his ribs. That song, it wasn't just any tune. It was the song Alexis always sang when she cooked, when she absent-mindedly got lost in thought, when she rested her head on his shoulder after a long day, a song she had claimed was her mother's lullaby, a melody so unique that hearing it now sent an ice-cold shock through his spine. His body moved before his mind could catch up, scanning the restaurant with laser focus. His heart pounded against his ribs as his gaze locked onto the source of the melody, a waitress near the far end of the dining hall. She wasn't extraordinary at first glance. Dark brown hair pulled into a neat ponytail, simple uniform, graceful movements as she set down plates with practiced ease. But then she turned slightly, revealing a profile that made Jared's breath hitch. It was her, or at least someone who looked exactly like Alexis. Jared's hands curled into fists, his mind racing. This is impossible. Alexis had been missing for 10 years. She had vanished without a trace. And yet here she was, standing a few feet away from him, humming that damned song like the past had never happened. For a long moment, he didn't move. He simply watched as the woman, Brianna, according to her name tag, went about her work, oblivious to his piercing stare. Every movement, every detail sent a fresh wave of disbelief crashing into him. Her eyes were the same shape, the curve of her lips, even the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, an old habit of Alexis's that he had once loved. And yet, there was something different. Her posture was slightly more rigid, her expression unreadable. The way she carried herself wasn't quite the same. Could it really be Alexis? Or was this just some cruel trick of fate? Jared wasn't a man prone to irrational thoughts. He built a billion-dollar empire through calculated risks and clear-headed decisions. But this made no sense. A soft voice broke through his trance. "Sir, would you like anything else?" Jared snapped his gaze to the waiter standing beside him, barely registering his words. "No," he muttered, standing abruptly. His business dinner was forgotten. He needed answers without hesitation. He weaved through the tables, following the waitress as she disappeared into the kitchen. His pulse thundered in his ears, but he forced himself to stay calm. Barging in wouldn't do him any favors. He waited near the side entrance, where the staff sometimes took breaks. Minutes stretched into eternity before she finally emerged. Stepping outside into the cool night air, Jared's heart pounded as he approached. "Excuse me?" Brianna turned, her brows knitting in slight confusion. Up close, the resemblance was even more unnerving. It was like looking at a ghost. "Yes," she asked, polite but distant. For a brief second, Jared couldn't find his voice. What was he even supposed to say? Instead of answering, he did something reckless. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his old photos until he found the one that mattered most. A picture of him and Alexis, taken just a few weeks before she disappeared. He held the screen up for her to see. Brianna's expression remained blank at first, until her gaze flicked to the image. Then, something changed. Her breath hitched, her eyes widening ever so slightly. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Jared saw it. Recognition. A fleeting, unguarded moment of recognition before she quickly masked it. Shaking her head. I don't understand. Why are you showing me this?" Jared's chest tightened. Because you look exactly like her. His voice was low, intense. Because you're humming a song that only she knew, and because I think you're Alexis Carter. Brianna took a step back, shaking her head more firmly this time. I don't know what you're talking about. My name is Brianna. I've lived in New York for the past 6 years. I think you're confusing me with someone else. Her words were steady, her tone even, but Jared wasn't convinced. You hesitated, he pointed out. For a second when you saw the photo. Brianna's jaw tightened, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. Something was wrong. Either she was lying, or she truly didn't remember. Jared studied her for a long moment before stepping back. He knew pushing too hard wouldn't get him anywhere. Not yet. Maybe I am mistaken, he said evenly, though every fiber of his being screamed otherwise. But I'm not done looking for answers. Brianna swallowed, clearly unsettled. Without another word, she turned and hurried back inside, leaving Jared standing alone in the night. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. This wasn't over. Not even close. Whatever had happened to Alexis 10 years ago, he was going to find out. And if Brianna was truly her, then one thing was certain. Someone had stolen her past. Jared sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His mind was racing, trying to process everything that had just happened. Brianna was Alexis. He was almost sure of it. But if she truly was, then how had she ended up here, working as a waitress with no memory of who she really was? The thought sent a chill through him. Someone had taken her. Someone had erased her past. Jared had spent the last 10 years believing he would never see Alexis again. He had imagined countless scenarios. A car accident, an abduction, even the possibility that she had left of her own free will. But deep down, he had always known something wasn't right. And now, she was standing right in front of him. Completely unaware of the life she had left behind, he pulled out his phone, scrolling through the list of contacts until he found the one he hadn't called in years. Detective Marcus Lane. The man had been in charge of Alexis's case when she disappeared. Even though the investigation had gone cold, Marcus had always believed there was more to the story than what they had found. Jared hesitated for only a second before dialing the number. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Lane, it's Jared Whitmore, he said, his voice steady but urgent. There was a pause. Well, there's a name I haven't heard in a while, Marcus said, his tone unreadable. What's going on? I need you to meet me. Tonight I think I found Alexis. Another pause. Longer this time then. In a more serious tone, Marcus said, Where are you? Le Chateau, on 5th Avenue. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Jared ended the call, his heart still pounding as he stared at the restaurant entrance. He had to be careful. If someone had taken Alexis before, they could do it again. But this time, he wouldn't lose her. Inside Le Chateau, Brianna stood in the small break room, gripping the counter as she tried to steady her breathing. Her hands trembled, her mind a mess of confusion and fear. The man outside, Jared, he knew her. He had looked at her like she was someone he had lost. And that picture he showed her. She had seen the woman in the photo before, but not in real life. In flashes, in dreams. Why did she look exactly like her? Brianna. She jumped at the sound of her manager's voice. Turning quickly, she forced a smile. Yes. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. She let out a shaky breath. I'm fine. Just a long night. Her manager eyed her suspiciously, but didn't press the issue. Your shift is almost over. You can clock out early if you need to. She nodded, grateful for the excuse to leave minutes later. Brianna stepped out into the cool night air, pulling her coat tighter around her. The streets were alive with people, but all she could think about was the man who had confronted her. She needed answers, but where would she even start? Her past was a blur before waking up in a hospital bed 6 years ago. They had told her she had been found unconscious on the side of a rural road, with no ID, no personal belongings, nothing, just a blank slate and a name she didn't recognize. They had called her Brianna because it was the name on a half-torn note found in her pocket. But what if that wasn't her real name? What if Jared was telling the truth? A strange unease settled in her chest. If she really was Alexis Carter, then why had she been left for dead? And who had done it to her? Jared was still in his car when he saw Marcus's dark sedan pull up next to him. The detective stepped out, wearing the same worn-out leather jacket he always did. His graying hair slightly disheveled, Marcus leaned against Jared's car, arms crossed. "All right, Whitmore, talk." Jared didn't waste time. "She's alive, Marcus." Marcus frowned. "Who? Alexis, or someone who looks exactly like her? She's working here as a waitress. She calls herself Brianna." Marcus's sharp eyes studied him. "And you're sure it's her?" Jared hesitated. "She doesn't remember anything. But when I showed her a picture of us, she reacted. It was small, but I saw it. She knew." Marcus sighed, rubbing his face. "Damn it. You believe me?" Jared asked. Marcus gave him a hard look. "Whitmore, I never stopped believing Alexis didn't just disappear on her own. But we had nothing to go on. No ransom note, no threats, no evidence of a struggle, just nothing. And now you're telling me she's been living under another name for years." Jared nodded. "I need to know what happened to her." Marcus exhaled sharply. "All right, I'll start digging, if this Brianna is really Alexis. Someone wanted to erase her past, and that means they're still out there." Jared's jaw tightened. Cassandra? He had never fully trusted his sister. She had always been cold, ambitious, ruthless when it came to getting what she wanted. And after Alexis disappeared, Cassandra had conveniently positioned herself as the one person he could rely on. He had let his guard down. "Start with the hospital she was found in," Jared said. "I want to know everything." Marcus nodded, already pulling out his phone. "If there's something to find, I'll find it." As Marcus walked away, Jared's gaze drifted back to the restaurant entrance, his mind racing. If someone had gone through this much trouble to erase Alexis's identity, they wouldn't want her past uncovered now. And if Cassandra was involved, she wouldn't sit back and watch him unravel the truth. Jared had finally found Alexis, but he wasn't the only one watching. Jared Whitmore sat in his office, the dim glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows across the polished mahogany surface. The city skyline stretched before him, glittering like a constellation of distant stars. But his mind wasn't on the view. His thoughts were trapped in the past, a past that refused to stay buried. A picture of Alexis stared back at him from his laptop screen. He had opened an old file, one filled with photos, news clippings, and every lead he had pursued in the years after her disappearance. Her smile in the pictures felt like a ghost haunting him. And now, she was back. But she didn't know it. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his trance. Marcus Lane's name flashed on the screen. Jared grabbed it immediately. "What did you find?" he asked, his voice clipped. Marcus sighed. "It wasn't easy, but I pulled some records from the hospital where she was found. The details don't add up." Jared's grip on the phone tightened. "What do you mean?" Marcus hesitated. "She was brought in unconscious to a clinic in upstate New York. No ID, no wallet, no phone, nothing. They listed her as Jane Doe until she woke up." Jared frowned. "That's what I expected, so what's off?" Marcus exhaled sharply. According to the attending physician, she had no signs of physical trauma, no head injury, no broken bones, nothing that would normally explain amnesia. And yet, she had no memory of who she was. Jared's stomach twisted. "So you're telling me this wasn't an accident? I'm telling you it looks like someone wanted her to forget," Marcus said grimly. "I looked into the clinic's records. The doctor in charge at the time, Dr. Montgomery, left the hospital a few years ago. He was never formally accused of anything, but his name kept popping up in questionable cases involving memory loss treatments." Jared swore under his breath. "Where is he now?" "Off the grid," Marcus replied. "But I'll find him." Jared leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning. If Alexis, Brianna, hadn't suffered a head injury, then her amnesia had to be induced. Someone had erased her past, and Jared had a sinking feeling he knew exactly who had orchestrated it. Cassandra. His sister had always resented Alexis. She had been cold, calculating, always whispering about how Jared should be with someone else, someone who understood the Whitmore legacy. But would she really go this far? His stomach clenched. He already knew the answer. Across town, Brianna sat curled up on her couch, staring at the old, faded notebook she had kept since waking up in the hospital 6 years ago. It was filled with fragmented thoughts, little details that had come to her over time. A blue dress, a white terrace, a name whispered in the wind. Jared. She had always believed they were just remnants of a life she had never lived, echoes of someone else's past. But now she wasn't sure. Her fingers traced the cover of the notebook as a shiver ran down her spine. Could Jared really be telling the truth? Her gut told her yes. That moment in the alley, when he had shown her that picture. She had recognized it. She had recognized herself. But how could that be possible? A sharp knock at the door made her jump. She hesitated before getting up and peeking through the peephole. A woman stood on the other side. Tall, elegant, cold. Brianna's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen this woman before, and yet, something about her felt dangerous. She didn't open the door. The woman knocked again, this time firmer. "Brianna." Her voice was smooth, almost sweet, but there was something unsettling about it. "I know you're in there. I just want to talk." Brianna took a step back, her heart pounding. "Who are you?" she called through the door. A pause. Then, the woman laughed softly. "You don't remember me, do you?" Brianna's blood turned to ice. "Open the door," the woman said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "We have unfinished business." Brianna did the only thing her instincts told her to do. She ran. Jared's phone rang again. He expected Marcus, but when he looked at the screen, his stomach dropped. "Brianna?" he answered instantly. "Brianna." Her breathing was shaky, panicked. "Someone came to my apartment." Jared shot to his feet. "Who? I don't know," she stammered. "A woman, tall, dark hair. She said I didn't remember her." Jared's blood ran cold. "Cassandra, where are you now?" he demanded. "I ran. I didn't know what else to do," Brianna admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm at the cafe near my apartment." "Stay there," Jared ordered. "I'm coming." He grabbed his coat and strode out of his office, his mind racing. Cassandra had made her move, and that meant time was running out. Jared drove through the streets of New York like a man possessed, his mind fixated on one thing, getting to Brianna before anything else happened. The fact that Cassandra had already made contact wasn't just a coincidence. She knew. She knew Jared had found Alexis. And now, she was trying to handle the situation before he could expose her. He pulled up outside the small cafe Brianna had mentioned, his heart hammering as he scanned the area. Through the large glass window, he spotted her sitting in the farthest booth, arms wrapped around herself, looking small, vulnerable. She was shaken. Jared wasted no time. He stepped inside, making his way straight to her table. The moment she saw him, a visible wave of relief crossed her face. He slid into the seat across from her, his voice low and controlled. "Are you okay?" Brianna nodded hesitantly. I don't know. I think so." She swallowed hard. "She just showed up at my door, like she knew exactly where I lived. She knocked, called me by name, and said that I didn't remember her." Jared clenched his jaw. That sounded exactly like something Cassandra would do. He exhaled, trying to keep his emotions in check. "What did she look like?" Brianna hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "Tall, dark hair?" She was elegant, but in a cold way. She looked up at him. Something haunted in her eyes. Her voice. It felt familiar, but I don't know why. Jared's fists tightened under the table. Cassandra had erased Alexis's memories, but her instincts still remembered. He leaned in, his tone firm. "Brianna, listen to me. That woman is dangerous. You can't trust her." Brianna's breath hitched. "Who is she?" Jared hesitated, knowing that whatever he said next could change everything. But she deserved the truth. "Her name is Cassandra Reynolds," he said slowly. "She's my sister." Brianna's lips parted slightly, confusion clouding her expression. "Your sister," Jared nodded. "And 10 years ago, she hated the fact that I was going to marry you." Brianna's breath caught. She shook her head, looking overwhelmed. No, that doesn't make sense. If I were this Alexis person, why would she care? Why would she come after me now?" Jared studied her carefully. "Because she knows the truth is coming out, and she's scared." Brianna rubbed her temples. "This is insane. I don't know what's real anymore." Jared softened his voice. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight, but you need to trust me." He held her gaze. "Please, let me help you. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then finally she whispered, "I don't know if I can." It hurt more than Jared wanted to admit, but he understood. She had been living a lie for years. Why would she suddenly trust a stranger claiming to know her past? But she wasn't safe, and he wouldn't let Cassandra get to her again. He took a slow breath. "Then at least let me take you somewhere safe." Brianna hesitated again, but something in her expression shifted. A quiet understanding, a silent agreement. She nodded. Cassandra Reynolds leaned back in her leather chair, swirling a glass of red wine in her hand. Her office, perched at the top of Reynolds Industries, overlooked the city skyline. Her empire, a kingdom she had built piece by piece after erasing Alexis Carter from Jared's life. And now, everything was threatening to fall apart. She tapped her manicured nails against the desk, her mind racing. She had underestimated her brother. She had thought that after a decade of dead ends, he had finally given up on Alexis. But no, Jared had found her. The girl had looked right at her, and felt something. Cassandra had seen the flicker of recognition in Brianna's eyes, no matter how hard she tried to hide it. The amnesia wasn't perfect. There were cracks, and Jared would exploit every single one of them. She couldn't allow that to happen. With a slow, calculating smile, she picked up her phone and dialed a number. It rang once before a man answered. "Yes." Cassandra's voice was smooth, unwavering. "I need you to take care of something for me." A pause. Then, "What's the target?" Cassandra's lips curled. "A woman named Brianna." Jared had never brought anyone to his private penthouse before. He had plenty of properties, hotels, luxury apartments, places he could have taken her, but this was his home, the one place where he actually felt in control of his life. And now, she was here. Brianna stepped inside hesitantly, her gaze sweeping across the massive open space. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city. Sleek furniture contrasted with warm lighting, and everything screamed wealth and power. "This is where you live?" she asked softly. Jared nodded, shutting the door behind them. "It's safe here." She hugged her arms around herself. "I don't understand any of this. Why would your sister want to hurt me?" Jared clenched his jaw. "Because she wanted you gone. Because 10 years ago you were supposed to marry me," he said. And Cassandra couldn't stand that. Brianna flinched slightly at his words, like they didn't quite fit with the version of herself she knew. She sat down on the edge of the couch, exhaling shakily. "I don't know what to do. If what you're saying is true, then my whole life has been a lie." Jared sat beside her, careful not to get too close. "I know this is overwhelming, but we'll find the truth. Together." She looked at him, something flickering behind her eyes, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. But as Jared let himself feel the smallest bit of hope, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a single message from Marcus. "Jared, we have a problem. Someone's looking for her. And they're not playing around." A cold dread settled over him. Cassandra wasn't done, and now neither was he. Jared felt a chill run down his spine as he read Marcus's message again. Someone's looking for her, and they're not playing around. His fingers tightened around the phone as he exhaled slowly. He should have known Cassandra wouldn't just back down, not after she had spent years orchestrating this entire deception. But what worried him the most wasn't just Cassandra. It was the unknown. If she had been bold enough to track Brianna down and show up at her apartment, what else was she capable of? He glanced at Brianna, who sat on his couch, still looking lost in her own thoughts. The soft glow of the penthouse lights cast shadows over her delicate features. Her brows slightly furrowed as she processed everything. She didn't belong in this mess. But the truth was, she had never had a choice. Jared cleared his throat. "Brianna." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I need you to be honest with me," he said gently. "Has anything strange happened to you lately, before tonight?" She hesitated, and for a second, Jared saw the internal battle playing out in her mind. Then, finally, she spoke. "There were a few times," she admitted. "Over the past few months, I felt like someone was watching me." Jared's jaw tightened. She rubbed her arms as if warding off a chill. "I thought I was imagining it, but sometimes I'd walk home and get this feeling, like someone was just out of sight, following me." His mind was already working through possibilities. If Cassandra had eyes on her before, it meant she was already keeping tabs long before tonight. She had been waiting for the right moment to make a move. Jared stood up, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling Marcus. We need to move fast." Brianna's expression tensed. "What do you mean?" He turned to her, his eyes unwavering. "Someone doesn't want you to remember who you are," he said. "And if they realize I'm protecting you, they're going to come after both of us." Brianna's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. She didn't finish because suddenly, the penthouse alarm blared. Jared spun toward the security panel just as the automated system announced. "Unauthorized entry detected, perimeter breach." His pulse slammed against his ribs. "No, not this fast." Brianna's eyes widened in panic. "What's happening?" Jared didn't answer. He crossed the room in long strides, pulling open a drawer near the fireplace and grabbing the gun he kept there for emergencies. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice sharper than intended. Brianna tensed but obeyed, stepping back as Jared moved toward the control panel. He quickly checked the surveillance feed on the screen. 3 men in black were in the hallway, disabling the security cameras as they moved. They weren't here for him. They were here for her. Jared's entire body went cold. He turned to Brianna, his expression unreadable. "We have to go now." She nodded, sensing the urgency in his voice. Jared grabbed her hand and led her toward the private elevator at the back of the penthouse. He pressed the hidden code on the panel, and the door slid open. They stepped inside just as the power flickered. Someone had tampered with the building's systems. Jared gritted his teeth. Cassandra wasn't wasting time. As the elevator descended, he felt Brianna trembling beside him. He tightened his grip on her hand. "We're going to get out of this," he said. She let out a shaky breath. Who were they? Jared's gaze darkened. "Hired men, if I had to guess. Cassandra's people." Brianna closed her eyes, shaking her head. "Why is she doing this?" Jared exhaled. "Because she knows you're remembering." The elevator came to a smooth stop at the private parking garage, and the doors slid open. Jared's black Aston Martin was waiting just a few steps away, but as soon as they stepped out, they heard the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps. Jared's instincts kicked in. He pushed Brianna behind him and pulled the gun from his waistband, from behind the parked cars. A voice called out, "You're making a mistake, Whitmore." Jared recognized that voice. A shadow emerged. A man in a tailored suit, casual but precise, with piercing gray eyes and a smirk that held zero warmth. Lorenzo Vega, Cassandra's right-hand man. Jared's grip tightened on the gun. "Get the hell out of my way." Lorenzo chuckled, stepping forward lazily. "Come on, Jared, let's be civil. No need for violence." Jared wasn't buying it. "You broke into my home," he said, his tone deadly. "That means you already made this violent." Lorenzo sighed, shaking his head. "Cassandra wants to have a conversation. That's all, hand over the girl, and we'll leave peacefully." Brianna's breath hitched behind him. Jared took a step forward, his gun still steady. "Not going to happen." Lorenzo's smirk didn't fade. "You sure about that?" He snapped his fingers. From the shadows, 2 more men stepped into view, both armed. Brianna tensed behind Jared, and he felt his rage coil like a spring in his chest. Lorenzo exhaled dramatically. "Look, Jared, I don't want to start a bloodbath here. Neither do you. Just hand her over and I promise she won't get hurt." Jared knew that was a lie. "Let me guess," he said. "That's the same thing Cassandra promised Alexis 10 years ago." Lorenzo's smirk vanished. Jared moved first, before anyone could react. He fired, hitting one of the armed men in the leg. The man dropped, his gun skidding across the floor. Lorenzo's eyes flashed with fury. "You son of a—" Jared grabbed Brianna's hand and ran. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets ricocheting off the concrete as Jared threw open the car door and shoved Brianna inside. He jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and gunned the engine. Tires screeched as they sped out of the garage, bullets shattering the rear windshield. Brianna was shaking, her breath coming in quick gasps. "Oh my God," she whispered. "They were really going to take me." Jared's hands tightened around the steering wheel. "They still will," he said, his voice cold with rage. Brianna turned to him, her eyes filled with fear. "What do we do now?" Jared's jaw clenched. "We stop running. We fight back." Jared drove through the streets of Manhattan like a man with a mission, his mind running through every possible move Cassandra could make next. The attack at his penthouse had been a clear message. She wasn't just trying to scare him. She wanted Brianna gone. Next to him, Brianna sat in stunned silence, hugging her arms as she stared out of the shattered back windshield. The city lights flickered across her face, but her expression was unreadable. She was still processing. Jared stole a quick glance at her. "Are you hurt?" She blinked as if breaking out of a trance. "No," she whispered. Then after a long pause, "I don't understand. Why does she want me gone so badly?" Jared's grip tightened on the wheel. "Because if you remember who you are, Cassandra's entire life falls apart." Brianna's hands curled into fists in her lap. "I don't even know what that means." Jared sighed, trying to keep his voice steady. "It means that 10 years ago, you were my fiancé, and Cassandra couldn't stand that." She inhaled sharply, her fingers twitching against her sweater. She was trying to absorb the information, but the weight of it was crushing. "Why?" she finally asked. Jared kept his eyes on the road. "Because you were a threat to her control, to our family's fortune, to everything she thought she was entitled to." Brianna shook her head. "But why would she go this far? Couldn't she have just convinced you to leave me?" Jared let out a humorless chuckle. "She tried, and when that didn't work, she made you disappear." Silence filled the car. Brianna turned away, biting her lip. "I feel like I should be crying, or screaming, or something." Jared slowed at a red light and looked at her. "You don't have to feel anything right now," he said softly. "I know this is a lot." Her gaze met his, and for a fleeting second, something flickered there. Something familiar. But then she exhaled sharply and looked away. "Where are we going?" Jared hesitated. "Somewhere safe." Brianna narrowed her eyes. "I thought your penthouse was safe." His jaw clenched. "Not anymore." The light turned green, and Jared took a sharp turn onto a quieter street. "I have a backup place," he continued. "It's a property I own under a different name. Cassandra doesn't know about it." Brianna still looked uneasy, but she nodded. "Okay." Jared pressed his foot to the gas, accelerating toward the one place he knew they could regroup. Half an hour later, Jared pulled into the private underground parking of a sleek high-rise in Brooklyn. The building wasn't as ostentatious as his usual properties, but that was exactly why he had chosen it. No one would expect him to be here. He stepped out and opened the passenger door for Brianna. She hesitated before taking his hand, allowing him to help her out. As soon as they were inside the secure elevator, she sighed. "How many secret places do you have?" Jared smirked. "Enough." She shook her head. "You really are a billionaire, huh? Guilty, despite everything." She let out a soft laugh. It was small, barely there, but it made something tighten in Jared's chest. Alexis used to laugh like that, and he would be damned if he let Cassandra take it away from her again. Inside the apartment, Brianna wandered to the window, looking out over the glittering city skyline. She wrapped her arms around herself, lost in thought. Jared watched her, studying every micro-expression, every subtle movement. She was trying so hard to make sense of this new reality. He knew the feeling. Finally, she turned to him. "If Cassandra really did this to me, how do I get my memories back?" Jared's throat tightened. "We need to find Dr. Montgomery." Brianna frowned. "Who?" Jared ran a hand through his hair. "The doctor who treated you at the clinic after you were found." Marcus traced his records. "He's connected to cases of induced amnesia." Her face paled. "So my memory was taken on purpose?" Jared nodded grimly. "It wasn't an accident." Brianna inhaled shakily, stepping away from the window. "And now Cassandra knows I'm starting to remember." "Yes." A beat of silence stretched between them. Then she asked the one question Jared had been dreading. "What if I never remember?" He swallowed hard. "I mean," she continued, "what if I can't? What if whatever happened to me? What if it's permanent?" Jared didn't have an answer, so he told her the only thing he knew for certain. "It doesn't change the fact that you're Alexis." Brianna let out a slow breath. "But I don't feel like her." Jared's chest ached. He had spent a decade mourning Alexis, and now she was standing right in front of him. But she wasn't her. Not yet. And maybe not ever. The thought nearly broke him. But he wouldn't let Cassandra win. "Let's take it one step at a time," he said carefully. "We'll find Montgomery. We'll get answers." Brianna hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." Jared pulled out his phone and sent Marcus a message. "Find Montgomery, no matter what it takes." If Cassandra thought she could erase Alexis from existence, she had severely underestimated Jared Whitmore this time. He wouldn't stop until he got her back, and this time, he wouldn't lose her again. Brianna sat on the couch, her fingers gripping the fabric of her sweater as she stared at the skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city stretched before her, buzzing with life, unaware of the storm brewing inside her. She didn't belong here, not in this penthouse, not in Jared Whitmore's world, and yet, she couldn't ignore the way her body responded to his presence, the flicker of something familiar when he looked at her, the way her pulse raced whenever he said her name, Alexis. She wasn't ready to accept that was who she really was, but a part of her, a deep, terrifying part, wondered if it was true. Jared's voice pulled her back to reality. "I just got word from Marcus." She turned to face him, watching as he paced across the room, his phone still in hand. "He found Dr. Montgomery." Brianna's stomach twisted. Jared looked at her, his expression unreadable. "He's not in New York anymore. He left the clinic years ago and disappeared. But Marcus tracked him down to a small town in Pennsylvania." Brianna swallowed. "And you think he's the one who wiped your memory?" Jared finished. "Yeah, and I also think he didn't do it alone." She shivered. "Cassandra." Jared's jaw tightened. "Exactly." Brianna exhaled, gripping her arms. "So what happens now?" Jared's eyes darkened. "We go to Pennsylvania." Brianna's breath hitched. "Just like that." Jared nodded. "Just like that." He said it so simply, as if they weren't about to confront the man who had stolen her entire life. But maybe that was what she needed. Answers. She straightened. "Okay." A flicker of relief crossed Jared's face. "We leave in an hour." 2 hours later, Jared's black Aston Martin sped down the highway, the city lights fading in the rearview mirror. Brianna sat in the passenger seat, staring at the empty road ahead. She hadn't said much since they left, and Jared hadn't pushed her, but he could feel the tension rolling off her in waves. Finally, she spoke. "What if I don't want to remember?" Jared's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He had expected the question. "Do you mean that?" he asked quietly. Brianna let out a slow breath. "I don't know. It's just, if I remember and everything you're saying is true, then that means my entire life has been a lie." Jared glanced at her. "And if you don't remember," she hesitated, "then maybe I can just keep living the way I was before." Jared clenched his jaw. The thought of losing her again, even as Brianna, was unbearable. But he understood. "If that's what you decide," he said carefully, "I won't force you, but I think you deserve to know the truth." She turned to him, her eyes searching his. "And what if the truth is worse than not knowing?" Jared's throat tightened. "Then I'll be here," he said simply. Brianna didn't answer, but something shifted in her expression. She was scared, and so was he. They arrived at a small, run-down house on the outskirts of a quiet Pennsylvania town. Jared parked the car, his gaze sweeping over the property. The place looked abandoned, shutters falling apart, weeds growing wild, but according to Marcus, Dr. Montgomery was inside. Brianna shifted beside him. "This feels wrong," Jared exhaled. "It probably is." She shot him a sharp look, comforting. A smirk tugged at his lips, despite the tension. "Stay close." They stepped out of the car and approached the door. Jared knocked once, then twice. Silence. He was about to knock again when the door creaked open. A frail man in his 60s stood in the doorway, his eyes darting nervously between them. "Who are you?" Jared didn't hesitate. "We need to talk." Montgomery's face paled. "I don't..." Jared pushed inside, forcing the man to step back. "No more lies." Brianna followed hesitantly, glancing around the dimly lit interior. The place smelled of dust and secrets buried too long. Montgomery swallowed hard. "You shouldn't be here." Jared's voice was ice. "And yet, here we are." Montgomery's gaze flickered to Brianna, and something in his expression changed. Recognition. He took a shaky breath. You weren't supposed to come back." Brianna froze. Jared stepped forward, his patience gone. "What did you do to her?" Montgomery wrung his hands. I didn't have a choice. I was paid to erase her," Jared snapped. Montgomery flinched. "Yes." Brianna's breath came in short gasps. "Why?" she whispered. Montgomery looked at her, his eyes filled with something that almost resembled regret. Because she ordered me to. Jared's fists clenched. Cassandra. Montgomery nodded. She said you were a problem, that you needed to forget everything. Brianna swayed slightly. Jared reached for her, steadying her. Montgomery hesitated. I used a treatment, a method that suppresses memory retrieval. Brianna's voice was barely a whisper. Can it be reversed? Montgomery hesitated. It's risky. Jared's eyes narrowed. Explain. Montgomery licked his lips. If the memories were deeply suppressed, forcing them back could be painful, traumatic. Brianna swallowed. But it's possible. Montgomery hesitated. Yes. Jared's gaze darkened. Then you're going to fix what you did. Montgomery paled. I can try. Brianna clenched her hands into fists. She had a choice. Stay Brianna, or find out who she really was. No matter the cost, she turned to Jared. Let's do it. And just like that, the past was about to come back. Brianna sat rigid in the small, dimly lit living room of Dr. Montgomery's house, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. The air inside was thick with the weight of what was about to happen. Across from her, Jared stood with his arms crossed, his jaw set in a tense line. He didn't trust Montgomery, not even a little. But this man held the key to Alexis's past. The doctor sat nervously on the armrest of a worn-out chair, wringing his hands. His once well-groomed appearance was gone, replaced by dark bags under his eyes, and an air of exhaustion and fear. He knew he had nowhere to run. "You're sure you want to do this?" Montgomery asked, his voice shaky as he looked at Brianna. She swallowed hard. She wasn't sure of anything, but she needed answers. "I need to know who I am," she whispered. Montgomery exhaled and nodded slowly. "All right." Jared took a step forward. "No games, Montgomery. No tricks. If you try anything." Montgomery raised a trembling hand. "I have no reason to lie. He hesitated before sighing. "I did things I'm not proud of. I worked for powerful people, but I never wanted to hurt her." Jared's hands curled into fists. The hell he didn't. Montgomery took a deep breath. "I was approached by Cassandra Reynolds 10 years ago. She came to me with an offer I couldn't refuse. Money, influence, protection. But the task she wanted, it wasn't easy." Brianna's stomach churned. "She wanted me to make you forget," Montgomery continued, looking directly at her. "Not just temporarily, permanently." Jared's body tensed, but he forced himself to listen. Montgomery's fingers trembled as he continued. "There's a treatment, a process where certain memories can be suppressed. Cassandra wanted to erase every trace of your relationship with Jared. She didn't want you dead, just gone from his life." Brianna felt her breath catch in her throat. "And you did it." Montgomery looked away. "Yes." Jared's patience snapped. He lunged forward, grabbing Montgomery by the collar and slamming him against the wall. "You stole 10 years from her," Jared growled. "Do you have any idea what you did?" Montgomery gasped, his hands gripping Jared's wrists. I know, and I regret it. But listen to me. I can fix it." Jared's grip tightened, his anger pulsing through him like fire. Brianna suddenly stood. "Jared," she said softly. He didn't let go immediately. Every part of him wanted to hurt this man. But Brianna was watching, and this wasn't about revenge. It was about getting her back. With a deep breath, Jared released Montgomery, stepping back but keeping his glare locked on him. Montgomery coughed, rubbing his throat. "If you want the memories back, I can reverse the suppression. But I have to warn you, it won't be easy." Brianna's hands trembled. "What do you mean?" Montgomery sat down, his expression serious. "The process was designed to suppress specific memories connected to strong emotional triggers. If we force them back, it could be overwhelming, painful." Jared's chest tightened. "How painful?" Montgomery hesitated. "Some patients experience severe migraines, emotional breakdowns, even temporary disorientation. The mind buried these memories for a reason. Forcing them back could be traumatic." Brianna bit her lip. She already felt like she was drowning in confusion, but she had come this far. She squared her shoulders. "I want to do it." Jared's stomach twisted. "Brianna, you don't have to." "I do," she interrupted. looking at him with determination. "I need to know who I am, Jared. I need to know the truth." Jared exhaled sharply. He hated this, but he wouldn't take this choice away from her. "All right," he said, his voice tight. "We do this on my terms. If anything goes wrong, we stop." Montgomery nodded. "Understood." Jared turned back to Brianna. "Are you sure?" She met his gaze. "I've never been more sure of anything." Montgomery led them to a small makeshift medical room in the back of the house. The space was cluttered, old equipment scattered across metal trays. Brianna sat in a reclined chair, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Jared stayed by her side, his hand gripping hers. Montgomery adjusted a small device near her temples, attaching sensors to track neurological activity. "This will be a combination of medication and guided memory retrieval," Montgomery explained. "Once we begin, your mind will start pulling back suppressed memories." Brianna swallowed hard. "And then what?" "You'll have to process them." She exhaled shakily. "Okay." Montgomery prepared the injection, glancing at Jared. "You should be prepared. She might—" "I'm not leaving," Jared interrupted firmly. Montgomery nodded and pressed the needle to Brianna's arm. "Just relax," he said. Brianna barely had time to brace herself before the world tilted. It started as a whisper. Then, suddenly the floodgates burst open. A dress, white, lace. She was wearing it. The weight of a veil rested on her shoulders. Laughter. Jared's laughter. He was smiling at her, holding her hands, whispering promises. Her breath hitched. The images flickered. Flashes of a warm summer day, a wedding venue, champagne glasses clinking together, then darkness. Her stomach lurched. A scream, her own, hands grabbing her, pulling her away. A sharp pain against her head. Then, nothing. Brianna gasped, her body jolting violently. Jared's hand tightened around hers. Brianna. Her breathing was ragged, her pulse erratic, but when she opened her eyes, tears streamed down her face. She looked up at Jared, her lips trembling. And then she said it. A name. Her name. "Jared," she whispered, her voice breaking. I remember." Jared's breath hitched. His Alexis was finally coming back, but before either of them could react, Montgomery's phone suddenly buzzed. He glanced at the screen. His face turned pale. Jared caught the shift in his expression. "What is it?" Montgomery swallowed hard. "It's Cassandra." The room froze. Jared's eyes darkened. "She knows we're here." Montgomery looked up, his voice shaking. "No," he corrected. "She's already on her way." Jared's mind snapped into action the second Montgomery uttered those words. Cassandra was coming. He turned sharply to the doctor. "How long do we have?" Montgomery hesitated, his face pale. I don't know. If she tracked me down, she probably had someone watching the house. She could be minutes away." Jared swore under his breath. Next to him, Brianna— no, Alexis was still trembling, her breathing uneven as the weight of her resurfacing memories pressed down on her. Her wide, glassy eyes met his, a flicker of panic in them. "I remember," she whispered, her voice raw. "I remember the wedding, I remember her." Jared's stomach twisted. Alexis blinked, gripping the armrests of the reclined chair as if trying to steady herself. "She was there, Jared. She took me." The confirmation should have felt like vindication. But all Jared felt was rage. His sister had stolen Alexis's life, and now she was coming to finish the job. "We need to move," Jared said, snapping into motion. "Now." He grabbed Alexis's hand, pulling her to her feet. She staggered slightly, her mind still reeling from the forced memory retrieval. But she nodded. Jared turned to Montgomery. "You're coming with us." The doctor stiffened. "What? No. If Cassandra finds out I helped, she'll kill you," Jared finished flatly. "Which is why you're not staying here." Montgomery swallowed hard but didn't argue. Jared pulled out his phone, dialing Marcus. The call rang once before the detective answered. "Tell me you're not about to say something stupid." "We're in trouble," Jared said. "Cassandra knows we're here." Marcus swore. "How much time?" "No idea. We're heading out now. I'll send a location. Meet me there." Jared hung up and turned to Alexis. "Can you walk?" She straightened slightly, the strength in her eyes returning. "I'm fine." Jared studied her carefully. She looked exhausted. the weight of her memories settling in like an unbearable burden. But Alexis Carter had always been a fighter. He nodded. "Let's go." They barely made it outside before the first black SUV pulled up. Jared's instincts screamed danger. The second the vehicle skidded to a stop in the driveway, the headlights flashed in their direction, illuminating the 3 figures inside. A second later, the driver's door swung open. Lorenzo Vega, Cassandra's personal fixer. Jared's jaw clenched as the man stepped out, his usual smirk in place. "Well, well," Lorenzo drawled. "Didn't take you long to start digging where you shouldn't, Whitmore." Jared pushed Alexis slightly behind him, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun tucked into his waistband. Lorenzo's eyes flicked toward Alexis. "And look who's finally waking up. How's the headache, sweetheart?" Alexis's breath caught, her nails digging into Jared's arm. She remembered him. Jared didn't hesitate. He pulled his gun. Lorenzo's smirk didn't falter, but he raised his hands in mock surrender. "Easy, Whitmore. Let's not make a mess in front of the good doctor." Jared's grip tightened. "Get in your car, drive away, or I put a bullet in your knee." Lorenzo sighed dramatically. "You really are no fun." Then more seriously, "Cassandra just wants to talk." Jared scoffed. "Like hell she does." Lorenzo tilted his head. "You sure about that?" "She's willing to negotiate." Alexis's nails bit harder into Jared's arm. "She's lying," she whispered. "She never negotiates." Jared didn't take his eyes off Lorenzo. "You heard her?" Lorenzo sighed. "Fine, have it your way." Then he moved. Jared fired first. The bullet slammed into the hood of the SUV, making the 2 men in the back seat duck. Lorenzo twisted to the side, pulling his own gun. But Jared was already grabbing Alexis and moving. "Run!" he ordered. Montgomery stumbled behind them as Jared fired another warning shot, forcing Lorenzo to take cover behind the SUV. They sprinted toward Jared's car. Lorenzo shouted behind them, "You won't get far, Whitmore." Jared shoved Alexis into the passenger seat, barely waiting for Montgomery to scramble into the back before slamming the car into reverse. Tires screeched as they tore out of the driveway. Gunfire erupted behind them. Jared cursed, ducking slightly as a bullet shattered the side mirror. This was war now. They didn't stop until they were miles outside of town. The city lights fading in the distance, Jared pulled into an abandoned warehouse lot, Marcus's chosen meeting point. Alexis was still breathing hard, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her seatbelt. Jared reached over, gently prying her fingers loose. "You're safe." She turned to him, her eyes fierce despite her exhaustion. "Not yet." Jared swallowed hard. She was right. Cassandra wouldn't stop. Not until Alexis was buried in the past again. Jared got out of the car as Marcus's black SUV pulled up. The detective stepped out, his gaze immediately scanning Jared, Alexis, and Montgomery. "I don't even have to ask if it went badly," Marcus muttered. Jared exhaled sharply. "Cassandra's playing for keeps." Marcus rubbed his face. "Of course she is." He glanced at Alexis, his gaze softening. "You remember anything?" Alexis met his eyes. "Enough." Marcus nodded. "Good. Then it's time to go after her." Jared's eyes narrowed. "What do you have?" Marcus smirked. "Let's just say Cassandra made a mistake." Jared's pulse quickened. "What kind of mistake?" Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling for a second before turning the screen toward them. It was a document. A bank transfer. From Cassandra Reynolds to Dr. Montgomery. Jared's blood went cold. Proof. It wasn't enough to bring her down completely. But it was a start. A way to make Cassandra squirm. Jared turned to Alexis. "We're not running anymore." Alexis inhaled deeply. She wasn't Brianna anymore. She was Alexis Carter, and she was ready to fight. "Let's finish this," she said. Jared's lips curled into a smirk. Now Cassandra was the one who should be afraid. The warehouse was eerily silent, save for the occasional hum of passing cars in the distance. Inside, Marcus spread out documents across a metal table, the dim overhead light casting harsh shadows on his face. Jared stood beside Alexis, his body tense. His hand hovered near the gun tucked in his waistband. A habit now. After tonight's ambush, Dr. Montgomery sat at the far end of the room, shoulders slumped, his gaze darting nervously between them. He knew he wasn't out of danger yet, but Jared wasn't focused on him. He was focused on her, Alexis, the way she stood. Her posture slightly different now, her breathing measured but heavy. She was fighting to stay grounded as her mind churned through the memories that had begun to resurface. Jared could see it happening in real time. The way her brows furrowed when she tried to piece everything together. The flickers of realization behind her eyes. Marcus cleared his throat, dragging Jared's attention back. "This transfer," Marcus said, tapping a document, "is the key." Jared's gaze locked on the page. It was a direct payment from Cassandra to Montgomery, dated 10 years ago, just a week before Alexis had vanished. "That's proof," Jared said, his voice low. Marcus nodded. "It won't be enough to get her arrested outright, but it's a start. If we can trace more transactions, we can take her down," Jared finished. Alexis let out a sharp breath. "If we get that close, she'll know. She'll do something desperate." Jared turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "She already has." Alexis swallowed, and Jared could tell she was remembering something else. "Talk to me," he said gently. "What do you see?" She blinked, her gaze unfocused for a moment before she spoke. "I see the wedding venue," she murmured. "The morning of the ceremony." Jared stiffened, she remembered. Alexis touched her temple, eyes squeezed shut. "I was in the bridal suite, looking at my dress. I was happy." Jared's chest ached at the thought. She had been happy, until Cassandra had taken everything away. Alexis took a shaky breath. Then she came in. Jared didn't need to ask who. "Cassandra." She was calm at first, too calm. "She told me that the wedding was a mistake, that you would ruin my life, that I wasn't good enough for you." Jared's hands curled into fists. "She said she was protecting me, but there was something else in her eyes. I didn't understand it then." "What was it?" Jared asked. Alexis's eyes opened slowly, and when she looked at him, her voice was ice. "Hatred." A heavy silence fell between them. Jared exhaled sharply. "What else do you remember?" Alexis's fingers curled against the table. "She wanted me to walk away, to disappear. When I refused, Her voice faltered. Jared stepped closer, his voice low. "Alexis, it's okay. You're safe." She let out a shuddering breath. "She drugged me." Jared's blood ran cold. Alexis swallowed hard. "She must have put something in my drink, because the next thing I knew, I was in a car, moving. Everything was blurry. I tried to fight, but my body wouldn't listen." Montgomery shifted uncomfortably. Jared shot him a deadly glare. "What happened next?" Jared asked, forcing himself to stay calm. Alexis pressed her fingers to her temple, her breathing ragged. "I heard voices, Lorenzo. Cassandra, they were arguing." She squeezed her eyes shut. "Cassandra was furious," she said. "I told you not to hurt her." And Lorenzo said, "She was fighting back." Jared's body locked up. "They were supposed to just take me away, erase my memories, and let me start over somewhere far from you," Alexis whispered. "But Lorenzo got impatient. He hit me. I remember the pain." Jared's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Alexis's voice dropped even lower. Then everything went dark. For a moment, nobody spoke. Jared took a slow breath, forcing back the rage boiling inside him. He needed to keep it together. For her. Marcus broke the silence first. "That's enough for tonight," he said, his voice gentle. "You've already remembered more than I expected." Alexis nodded, but Jared could tell she wasn't fully present. Her mind was still trapped in the past. Jared reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. She flinched at first but didn't pull away. "You're back now," he murmured, "and she can't take anything else from you." Alexis looked up at him, her lips parting slightly. For the first time since regaining her memories, she didn't look lost. She looked angry. "She stole my life," Alexis whispered. "She took everything from me." Jared nodded. "And we're going to make her pay." Cassandra Reynolds sat in her office, staring out at the city skyline. Her glass of wine sat untouched on the desk, her nails tapping against the polished wood. The moment Lorenzo entered, she turned, her eyes like sharpened glass. "Tell me you have good news," she said coldly. Lorenzo exhaled. "Depends." Cassandra's gaze darkened. "What the hell does that mean?" Lorenzo sat down across from her, resting an elbow on the chair. "It means that Jared's got Montgomery. And Alexis, she remembers." Cassandra's fingers curled around the armrest, her grip tightening. Lorenzo smirked. "Bet you didn't see that coming." She ignored his sarcasm. Alexis wasn't supposed to remember. Not now. Not ever. For 10 years, Cassandra had controlled everything, manipulated everyone. She had won, and now everything was unraveling. She took a slow, calculated breath. Then we adjust. Lorenzo raised a brow. Adjust. Cassandra swirled the wine in her glass, then set it down. If she remembers, she said coolly, then it's time to make sure she doesn't talk. Lorenzo tilted his head. You mean? Cassandra's lips curved into a slow, dangerous smile. Yes, she whispered. Kill her. And just like that, the game changed. Jared stood by the window of Marcus's safe house, staring into the dark, empty streets below. His mind raced with everything Alexis had just remembered. Cassandra had taken her, drugged her, ordered Lorenzo to erase her existence. And now that Alexis was remembering, Cassandra wasn't going to sit back and do nothing. Jared knew his sister well enough to understand one thing. She only played nice when she was winning, and now she was losing. He turned to where Alexis sat on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked exhausted, but she wasn't breaking. If anything, she looked sharper, determined. The memories were settling in now, her old self slowly pushing through the fog of years lost. Jared exhaled, moving closer. How are you feeling? She let out a small laugh. Dry, humorless. Like I just got hit by a truck, Jared smirked. Sounds about right. Alexis lifted her gaze to his, something flickering behind her eyes. But I'm not scared anymore. Jared's smirk faded. I spent years waking up in the middle of the night, terrified that I had lost something important, she continued. I just didn't know what. Now I do. She turned to face him fully. And I want it back. Jared's breath hitched. For the first time since all this started, he saw her again. Not just Brianna, lost and uncertain, but Alexis Carter, the woman he had been ready to marry, the woman who had fought for what she loved, who had challenged him, who had made him believe in something more than business deals and billion-dollar empires. And now, she was looking at him with the same fire in her eyes. Jared took a slow breath, steadying himself. Then we fight. Alexis nodded. What's our next move? Before he could answer, Marcus entered the room, his phone in hand. His expression was grim. We've got a problem. Jared tensed. What is it? Marcus set his phone on the table and played a voicemail. A robotic voice filled the room. If you want to see Alexis Carter alive, bring Dr. Montgomery to the old pier at midnight. Silence. Jared's blood went ice cold. Alexis straightened. That's Cassandra. Marcus nodded. She's done playing defense. She wants to end this tonight. Jared exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. It's a trap. Marcus snorted. Obviously. Alexis crossed her arms. But we can use it. Jared frowned. How? She leaned forward, eyes sharp. Cassandra doesn't know how much I remember. She's expecting us to react out of fear, to be desperate. Jared nodded. So we don't play by her rules. Marcus rubbed his jaw. You're suggesting we turn the trap on her. Alexis met his gaze. Exactly. Jared's lips curved into a slow smirk. Now this was Alexis. Marcus sighed, shaking his head. I hate this plan already. But Jared had already made up his mind. Cassandra had set the stage now. They were going to end this. Midnight. The old pier. The wind whipped through the abandoned dockyard, the sound of waves crashing against the wooden planks echoing through the darkness. Jared stepped out of the black SUV, his fingers itching to grab the gun tucked into his jacket. Marcus was by his side, scanning the area with trained eyes. Behind them, Alexis and Montgomery remained inside the vehicle. For now, Cassandra's men were already waiting, 3 black SUVs, all tinted windows, and standing right in the center of it all, Cassandra. She wore a sleek black dress, her posture perfect, her expression calm, too calm. Jared clenched his jaw. She was enjoying this. He walked forward, stopping just a few feet from her. I didn't think you had the guts to show up in person. Cassandra smiled. Oh, Jared, always underestimating me. Jared scoffed. Not anymore. Her eyes flickered with amusement. I assume you brought the doctor? Jared smirked. Maybe. Cassandra tilted her head. Jared, she sighed. You don't have the upper hand here. You never did. Jared's expression didn't change. Funny, I was about to say the same thing. Before she could react, a loud bang echoed through the pier. Smoke erupted from one of the parked SUVs. A planted distraction. Marcus moved first, gun drawn. He took out one of Cassandra's guards in a single, precise shot. Chaos erupted. Jared lunged forward, grabbing Cassandra's wrist before she could run. "Not this time," he growled. Cassandra struggled, eyes flashing with fury. "You're making a mistake." Jared yanked her closer, his voice low and lethal. "No," he said. "I'm fixing one." Just then, Alexis stepped out of the SUV. Cassandra stilled for the first time. Real fear flickered in her eyes. Alexis walked toward them slowly, her expression unreadable. Jared tightened his grip on Cassandra. "Look at her," he said coldly. "You tried to erase her, and she still came back." Cassandra recovered quickly, her smirk returning. "And what do you plan to do, kill me?" "That's not who you are, Jared." Jared leaned in. "You're right." Then he nodded toward Marcus. Cassandra frowned. "What?" Before she could finish, sirens wailed in the distance. Cassandra's eyes widened. Jared smiled. "I never needed to kill you, Cassandra. I just needed you to admit to everything." Realization dawned. The entire meeting had been recorded. Cassandra's face twisted in rage. "You set me up." Jared shrugged. "Call it poetic justice." Marcus stepped forward, slapping handcuffs onto Cassandra's wrists. She thrashed. "You can't do this." Marcus smirked. "Actually, I can. You just confessed to kidnapping, conspiracy, and attempted murder." Cassandra turned to Jared, eyes blazing. "I did this for us, for our family." Jared didn't flinch. "The only family I have," he said coolly, "is the one you tried to destroy." Cassandra screamed in frustration as she was dragged away by the arriving officers. Jared turned to Alexis, exhaling. "It's over." She met his gaze. "Not yet." And before he could react, she pulled him in and kissed him. The world faded. It wasn't just a kiss. It was everything. A decade of stolen time, a lifetime of love never forgotten. And just like that, Alexis Carter was truly home. The sirens had long faded into the distance, but the tension in the air still lingered. Jared stood near the edge of the pier, staring at the dark water below. His hands rested on the railing, the cold metal biting against his skin. It was over. Cassandra was in police custody. The woman who had torn his life apart, who had stolen Alexis from him, was finally going to pay for her crimes. So why did he feel so unsettled? Behind him, the sounds of cleanup continued. Marcus was still talking to the officers, making sure every piece of evidence was secured. Dr. Montgomery had been taken in for questioning, but Jared didn't care about him. The only person he cared about was her. Jared turned, his eyes immediately searching for Alexis. She stood a few feet away, arms wrapped around herself as she stared out at the ocean. The wind tousled her hair, the soft glow of the streetlights casting shadows across her face. She looked lost. Jared hesitated before walking toward her. His footsteps were quiet against the wooden planks, but she must have sensed him because she didn't flinch when he stopped beside her. "You okay?" he asked softly. Alexis let out a breath. "I don't know." Jared stayed quiet, waiting. "I thought that once Cassandra was gone, everything would feel right," she admitted, "like I'd finally be whole again." She turned to face him, her eyes filled with confusion and sadness. "But I don't feel whole, Jared. I feel broken." Jared's chest tightened. She shook her head. "I've spent 10 years living a life that wasn't mine, and now, suddenly, I remember everything. But where does that leave me?" Jared exhaled. "Wherever you want to be." Alexis let out a soft, humorless laugh. "That's the problem. I don't even know who I am anymore. Am I Alexis Carter? Am I Brianna? I've been both, but neither feels completely right." Jared understood that. He had spent years searching for her, fighting for a truth he didn't even know existed, and now that she was here, now that she was real again, he felt just as lost as she did. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going to lose her again. Jared reached out, gently taking her hand. "You don't have to figure it out tonight," he said, "or tomorrow, or next week, but you don't have to do it alone." Alexis swallowed hard, staring at their joined hands. "Jared, her voice faltered. What if I'm not the same person you fell in love with? Jared's heart clenched, but he didn't let go. You're not, he admitted. Her lips parted slightly, as if his words had struck something deep inside her. Jared stepped closer, his voice low, honest, and neither am I. He lifted his free hand, brushing his thumb against her cheek. 10 years is a long time, Alexis. We've both changed, but that doesn't mean we can't find our way back to each other. She blinked, a tear slipping down her cheek. Jared caught it with his thumb, his chest aching. I spent a decade looking for you, he murmured. But I'm not asking you to go back to who you were. I just want you to be you. A shaky breath left her lips. Jared, she whispered. He leaned in, his forehead resting gently against hers. I don't care how long it takes, he said. I'm not going anywhere. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly, Alexis melted into him. Her arms wrapped around his waist, and Jared pulled her close, holding her like she was his whole world. Because she was. And now, he finally had her back. 1 week later, the days passed in a blur. Cassandra was officially charged with kidnapping, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The evidence against her was airtight, thanks to Marcus's recordings and the financial trail she had carelessly left behind. Dr. Montgomery had accepted a deal. He would testify against Cassandra in exchange for a reduced sentence. Jared had spent the week handling the legal mess, making sure nothing could be undone. But his mind was always on Alexis. She had been quiet since that night at the pier. Not distant, exactly, but hesitant. She was trying to figure out where she belonged, and Jared wasn't going to rush her. So when Alexis texted him one evening, asking him to meet her at Central Park, he didn't hesitate. The crisp autumn air wrapped around him as he walked toward the small bridge overlooking the lake. And then, he saw her. She stood there, wrapped in a cream-colored coat, looking as breathtaking as ever. Jared's heart pounded as he approached. Hey! Alexis turned, offering a small smile. Hey! He searched her eyes. You okay? She nodded. Yeah, I think I am. Jared exhaled, relieved. I'm glad. She hesitated, then said, I needed time to think. Jared braced himself. I'm still figuring things out, she admitted. But there's one thing I do know. She took a step closer, looking up at him. I know that no matter who I was, or who I become, I don't want to do this without you. Jared's breath caught. She let out a small laugh. So if you're still willing to put up with me while I navigate this whole having my life back thing. Jared didn't let her finish. He cupped her face and kissed her. It wasn't desperate like the one at the pier. It wasn't fueled by adrenaline or relief. It was soft, sure, steady. When they finally pulled apart, Alexis let out a breathless laugh. I'll take that as a yes. Jared smirked. I told you. I'm not going anywhere. Alexis smiled, and for the first time in 10 years, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home. Jared watched as Alexis tilted her head back, eyes closed, breathing in the crisp autumn air. The golden leaves swirled around them, carried by the gentle breeze that whispered through Central Park. He had always loved autumn in New York, but this moment with her, was something else entirely. She was here, real, whole, and after everything, she had chosen to stay. When she opened her eyes again, there was a clarity in them that hadn't been there before. I feel like I'm finally waking up, she murmured, looking at him. Like I've been asleep for 10 years and I'm just now starting to live again. Jared swallowed the lump in his throat. Then let's make up for lost time. A smile tugged at the corners of her lips. You always make it sound so simple. He smirked. It is. We start fresh, one step at a time. She let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. You say that like it's easy, but I have no idea where to even start, Jared. I don't have a job. I don't have a home. Everything I thought I knew about my life is a lie. It's like I'm standing in the middle of two roads, and I don't know which one to take. Jared reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Then don't take either. Make your own road. She blinked, surprised by his words. He squeezed her hand gently. You don't have to be who you were before, and you don't have to keep being Brianna either. You get to decide who Alexis Carter is, on your own terms. She studied him for a long moment, her gaze softening. And what if I get lost along the way? Jared smiled. then I'll find you. Every time, a silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, but heavy with something unspoken. Finally, Alexis exhaled and nodded. Okay. Jared arched a brow. Okay. She nodded again. Let's see where this goes. Relief flooded through him, and without thinking, he leaned in, brushing his lips softly against hers. She melted into him, the warmth of the moment sinking deep into his bones. When they finally pulled away, she sighed. I should probably find a place to stay. Jared hesitated before saying, You could stay with me. Alexis looked up at him, her expression unreadable. Jared, no pressure, he said quickly. Just until you figure things out, my place is safe, and I'll be there if you need anything. She studied him, then let out a slow breath. All right, but just for now. Jared smirked. Of course, he was lying, because deep down, he knew that if Alexis moved back into his life, he was never letting her go again. The ride to his penthouse was quiet, but comfortable. Alexis stared out the window, watching the city blur past in streaks of neon and headlights. Jared stole glances at her, taking in the way she seemed more at ease than she had been in days. She was still processing, still trying to put the pieces together. But she wasn't running. That was enough. When they arrived, she hesitated at the threshold, staring up at the towering building. Feels different coming here as me. Jared reached for her hand. Then let's make it feel like home. She let him lead her inside. The penthouse hadn't changed since the last time she was here. Sleek, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the skyline, but something about it felt different now. Maybe because for the first time in 10 years, Alexis Carter was standing in it again. Jared watched her take in the space, wondering what she was thinking. After a long pause, she turned to him. I want to do something normal. Jared arched a brow. Normal. She nodded. Something simple. No running, no conspiracies, no stolen memories. She let out a small breath. I don't even remember what normal feels like. Jared thought for a moment, then grinned. Come with me. He led her to the kitchen, pulled open the massive fridge and started gathering ingredients. Alexis watched in amusement. Are you cooking? Jared smirked. You sound surprised. I am. He chuckled. I happen to make a mean grilled cheese. She snorted. That's not cooking. Excuse me? He said, mock offended. Grilled cheese is an art. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. All right then, impress me. Jared rolled up his sleeves and got to work, moving with practiced ease. Alexis watched, a small smile playing on her lips. For the first time in forever, it felt normal. No danger, no fear, just them. When he handed her a plate, she took a bite and let out a hum of approval. Okay, I'll admit it. This is good. Jared smirked. Told you. Alexis took another bite, then looked at him, something unreadable in her expression. This is the first meal I've had where I didn't feel like I was someone else. Jared's smirk faded. She set the plate down and met his gaze. Thank you. Jared swallowed. For what? She hesitated, then said softly. For finding me. His throat tightened. You were never lost, he murmured. You were just waiting to be found. She exhaled, eyes glistening, and then she kissed him. It was slow, deep, certain, and this time there was no hesitation when they pulled apart. Jared cupped her face, brushing a thumb along her cheek. Stay. Alexis held his gaze for a long moment before nodding, and just like that, she was home. Jared woke to the soft glow of the early morning sun filtering through the massive windows of his penthouse. He turned his head slightly and found Alexis curled up beside him, her breathing slow and steady. For a moment, he just watched her, letting himself believe, if only for a few seconds, that everything was normal, that they had never been separated, that they had never lost 10 years. But reality came crashing back the moment she stirred, her brow furrowing slightly as if she were still battling ghosts in her sleep. Jared reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Morning. Her eyes fluttered open, sleepy and soft. She blinked a few times before her gaze focused on him, and something tender and uncertain flickered there. Morning, she whispered. Jared searched her expression. How do you feel? She hesitated. Like I don't know what comes next. Jared exhaled slowly. Then we figure it out. Together. Alexis gave him a small, almost sad smile. "You make everything sound so simple. It doesn't have to be complicated," he said softly. She looked away for a moment, staring at the city skyline beyond the glass. "I still don't know who I am." Jared sat up slightly, resting his arm on the pillow beside her. "You're Alexis Carter." She let out a quiet laugh. "That's the thing, Jared. I don't feel like Alexis, but I don't feel like Brianna either. I feel like someone in between." Jared thought about that for a long moment. "Then, finally," he said, "then be her." She looked at him, confused. He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Be the person you are now. Not who Cassandra tried to erase. Not who you had to be to survive. Just you." She swallowed hard. "And if I don't know who that is yet?" Jared brushed his thumb against the back of her hand. "Then I'll wait while you figure it out." Something in her cracked then, and her shoulders relaxed just a little. For the first time since regaining her memories, she wasn't drowning. She was breathing. The rest of the morning passed in quiet moments. Coffee on the balcony, brief smiles exchanged over breakfast, a sense of fragile normalcy settling between them. But Alexis knew it wouldn't last, because no matter how much she tried to pretend they could just start over, the past still loomed over them, heavy and unrelenting, and it wasn't done with her yet. Around noon, Marcus called. Jared put the phone on speaker, and Alexis listened as the detective's voice came through. "Cassandra's lawyer is already playing dirty. They're trying to get her bail hearing expedited." Jared frowned. "On what grounds?" Marcus let out a tired sigh, claiming there's not enough solid evidence for her to be considered a flight risk. "It's bullshit. But we need to be prepared if she gets out. She'll come for Alexis again." Jared finished, his jaw tightening. Alexis stiffened at the mention of Cassandra's name. Marcus hesitated before saying, "There's something else." Jared's fingers curled against the table. "What is it?" "We found another bank account under Cassandra's alias. It's been active recently. Someone's been moving money." Jared's eyes darkened. "Who?" "We don't know yet," Marcus admitted. "But I don't like it. Cassandra might be behind bars, but she still has people on the outside." A chill ran down Alexis's spine. "You think she planned for this?" "Cassandra always has a backup plan," Jared muttered. Marcus sighed. "I'll keep digging. Just watch your backs." Jared ended the call, his mind already spinning with possibilities. Alexis bit her lip. "She's still pulling strings." Jared nodded. "But we're not letting her win this time." He turned to her, his gaze unwavering. "We end this." She inhaled sharply, then nodded. "I want to be the one to face her." Jared tensed. "Alexis." "No," she said firmly. "She stole 10 years from me, Jared. I won't let her control the rest of my life from a prison cell. I need to see her." Jared clenched his jaw, every protective instinct in his body screaming no, but he saw the determination in her eyes. This wasn't just about closure. It was about taking back what was hers. Finally, he exhaled. "All right." Alexis swallowed hard. "All right." Jared nodded. "But I'm coming with you." A flicker of relief crossed her face. They both knew this wouldn't be easy, but it was time to face the past head-on and finish what Cassandra started. The detention center was cold, sterile, filled with the distant hum of security cameras and the clinking of metal doors. Jared and Alexis sat in a dimly lit visitation room, the tension between them thick and heavy. Then, the door opened. Cassandra walked in, wrists bound in cuffs, but still carrying herself like she owned the room. A slow, mocking smile spread across her face as she took the seat across from them. "Well," she mused, "if it isn't my darling brother and his long-lost bride." Jared clenched his jaw, but it was Alexis who spoke first. "You lost," she said, her voice cold. Cassandra tilted her head. "Did I?" Jared frowned. The unease settling deeper in his chest, Cassandra's gaze flicked to Alexis, her expression almost amused. "How does it feel?" "Remembering?" Alexis held her stare. "It feels like freedom." Cassandra's smirk didn't falter. "You always were sentimental." Jared leaned forward, his voice like steel. "Cut the act. Cassandra, who's moving your money?" For the first time, her smirk faltered, but it was gone just as quickly. Cassandra let out a soft laugh. "Oh, Jared, you really think locking me away would stop this?" Jared's blood ran cold. "Let me give you a little hint. Cassandra murmured, her eyes gleaming with something dangerous. You caught me, but I'm not the only one who wanted Alexis gone. Alexis's breath hitched. Jared's grip on the table tightened. What the hell are you talking about? Cassandra leaned back, looking pleased with herself. You thought it was just me, oh dear brother. She tilted her head. You really should have looked deeper. Jared's stomach twisted, because for the first time he realized Cassandra wasn't working alone, and whoever else had wanted Alexis gone was still out there. Jared stared at Cassandra, his fists tightening against the cold metal table. He had expected arrogance, defiance, even mockery. But this was something else. Cassandra sat back in her chair, a slow smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. She was enjoying this. She wanted them to squirm. Alexis shifted beside him, and when Jared stole a glance at her, he could see it. The flicker of fear, not the kind that made her want to run, but the kind that made every instinct scream that something was wrong. What do you mean you weren't the only one? Alexis demanded, her voice steady despite the unease creeping into her features. Cassandra shrugged as if she had just told them something insignificant. I mean exactly what I said. Did you really think I pulled this off alone? Jared exhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. Who? Cassandra's smirk widened. Now, where's the fun in just giving you that answer? Jared leaned forward, lowering his voice. You don't have the upper hand anymore, Cassandra. You're in prison. This isn't a game. She arched a brow. Isn't it? Jared's patience snapped. You're going to rot in here, Cassandra, he said coldly. You'll lose everything. Your money, your influence, your freedom. But you could still make a deal. Tell us who helped you. And maybe, I'll make sure you don't spend the rest of your life in solitary confinement. Cassandra's lips pressed into a thin line. For a brief second, he thought he saw a flicker of hesitation, but then she laughed. A soft, chilling sound. You think you can still manipulate me, Jared? She mused. That's cute. Jared clenched his jaw. Cassandra turned her gaze back to Alexis, her expression almost amused. You always were a problem. You know, even when you didn't know who you were, you still managed to ruin things. Alexis's hands curled into fists. You're not scaring me, Cassandra sighed dramatically. I'm not trying to, but I will say this. She leaned in, her tone lowering. Be careful, Alexis. Jared stiffened. Cassandra's gaze flickered to him before she continued. You've spent so much time looking in the wrong direction, searching for the wrong enemy, but the truth, it's closer than you think. Silence then. Cassandra leaned back, offering them one final smirk. That's all the help you'll get from me? Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a prison empire to run. Jared stood abruptly, pulling Alexis up with him. He had heard enough. Alexis didn't say another word as they turned to leave, but Jared didn't miss the way Cassandra watched them go, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. The ride back to the penthouse was tense. Jared could feel the weight of Cassandra's words pressing against his chest. The truth is closer than you think. Alexis stared out the window, her arms wrapped around herself. He could tell she was running through every possible meaning behind what Cassandra had said, just like he was. Finally, she broke the silence. What if she's telling the truth? Jared's grip tightened on the steering wheel. She's a manipulator. She wants to get inside your head. Alexis shook her head. No, not this time. Jared exhaled. We don't know that. She turned to face him. You felt it too, Jared. She wasn't just messing with us. She was warning us. Jared clenched his jaw. He hated to admit it, but she was right. Cassandra might have been cruel, but she had nothing to gain by lying about this, which meant someone else had wanted Alexis gone, and that person was still out there. Back at the penthouse, Marcus was waiting. He leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, his expression grim. I don't like the look on either of your faces. How bad was it? Jared exhaled. Worse than expected. Alexis sat down at the dining table, rubbing her temples. Cassandra wasn't working alone. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. Come again. Jared poured himself a drink, his mind still reeling. She didn't do it all on her own. There's someone else. Marcus swore under his breath. Jared took a slow sip before setting the glass down. We need to figure out who. Marcus ran a hand down his face. I'll start digging. But if Cassandra was covering for someone, they're probably damn good at hiding. Jared's jaw tensed. Then we need to force them out. Marcus narrowed his eyes. And how do you suggest we do that? Alexis looked up, her voice quiet but certain. We make them think I'm vulnerable. Jared's head snapped toward her. No. Alexis met his gaze. Jared. I said no, he repeated, his voice sharp. You are not bait. Alexis squared her shoulders. Jared, whoever this is, they think they won. They think I'm just a loose end that got tied up. But if we make them believe I'm still a threat. Jared shook his head, already hating this plan. Absolutely not. Marcus rubbed his chin. Actually, she's not wrong. Jared shot him a glare. Marcus lifted his hands in defense. I'm just saying, it's the best way to draw them out. Whoever helped Cassandra is still out there, probably waiting to see if Alexis starts remembering more. Jared ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting. And what happens when they make another move? When they come after her again? Alexis held his gaze. Then we'll be ready. Jared's heart pounded. Every part of him wanted to shut this down, to lock Alexis away somewhere safe and keep her as far from danger as possible. But he knew her, and he knew she wouldn't back down. Finally, he let out a slow breath. We do this on my terms, he said, his voice firm. We control every piece of this. Alexis nodded. Marcus sighed. All right, I'll start pulling some strings, but we better be careful. Whoever this is, they've already won once. Jared exhaled, his fingers curling into fists. Not again. This time, they would find the real enemy. And this time, he wouldn't lose Alexis again. Jared barely slept that night. His mind was a battlefield, replaying Cassandra's words over and over again. You've spent so much time looking in the wrong direction, searching for the wrong enemy. But the truth, it's closer than you think. He sat in his office, staring at the skyline beyond the penthouse windows. The city lights flickered like ghosts in the darkness, mirroring the unease sitting heavy in his chest. Who the hell had helped Cassandra, who had wanted Alexis gone so badly that they were willing to erase her entire existence? The question clawed at him, but the answer remained just out of reach. A quiet creak behind him made him turn. Alexis stood in the doorway, wrapped in one of his sweaters, her bare feet barely making a sound against the hardwood floor. You're not sleeping, she murmured. Jared offered a wry smirk. Neither are you. She stepped inside, folding her arms. Can't, Jared exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. You okay? She hesitated before sitting down across from him. I don't know. Everything feels wrong, like I'm missing something. Jared studied her. What do you mean? Alexis's fingers tapped against her knee. It's a feeling, Jared. Like I should remember something important. But it's just out of reach. Jared leaned forward. We'll figure it out. She let out a slow breath. I want to go back. Jared frowned. Back where? She met his gaze. To where it happened. Jared's stomach tightened. You mean the wedding venue, she confirmed. Jared immediately shook his head. No way. Alexis arched a brow. Jared, no. He pushed himself up from the chair, pacing. That place isn't safe. If Cassandra had someone else helping her, they'll be watching. Alexis stood, her voice steady. That's exactly why I need to go. Jared turned to her, frustrated and protective and scared all at once. Alexis, I just got you back. I'm not taking risks with your life. Alexis stepped closer, resting a hand against his chest. You won't lose me again, she whispered. Jared swallowed hard. He knew she meant it, but the fear still sat heavy in his gut. Finally, he exhaled. Fine, we go, but we do this my way. Alexis gave a small, determined nod. Jared hated this plan, but if it got them closer to the truth, he was willing to risk everything. The old Reynolds estate was abandoned now, standing in eerie silence against the backdrop of the Hudson River. Jared parked the car a few feet from the entrance, his eyes scanning the overgrown path leading up to the once glamorous mansion. The last time he had been here, it had been his wedding day, the day his world had shattered. Alexis stood beside him, her breath hitching slightly as she took in the ruins of the past. The grand entrance was still intact, though ivy had started to creep up the stone walls. The windows, once gleaming with golden light, now looked hollow, like empty eyes staring back at them. This place feels... Alexis hesitated, rubbing her arms. Familiar and strange at the same time. Jared kept a protective hand on her lower back as they stepped inside. The ballroom was exactly as he remembered it, but frozen in time. Dust coated the crystal chandeliers. The marble floors were cracked in places, and yet, Alexis stared at it like she was standing in two realities at once. Jared watched her closely. "What do you see?" She inhaled deeply. "Flowers, white roses. There were so many." Jared nodded. "You loved them." She blinked rapidly. "And the music. A string quartet. I remember standing here waiting for the ceremony to start." Her fingers curled at her sides. But something was wrong. Jared's pulse spiked. Alexis squeezed her eyes shut, as if forcing the memory out of hiding. "I went to the bridal suite. Cassandra was already there." Jared fisted his hands. Alexis's breathing shallowed. She wasn't alone. Jared's entire body stiffened. Alexis's eyes flew open, wide with horror. "Oh my God." Jared grabbed her shoulders. "Alexis, what is it?" She stared at him, as if seeing something for the first time. "I remember," she whispered. Jared's pulse thundered. "Tell me." Alexis swallowed hard. It wasn't just Cassandra, Jared. There was someone else in the room that day. Someone who knew exactly what she was planning. Jared felt it coming before she even said it. Her voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. "It was my father." Jared's breath caught in his throat. He took a step back, stunned. "That's not possible," he murmured. Alexis's lips trembled. "Jared, I saw him. I remember now. He was there." Jared's mind raced, trying to process the impossible truth. Daniel Carter, a man he had once respected, the man who had welcomed him into his family, had been part of this. Jared shook his head. "Alexis, your father, he's been gone for years." Alexis looked at him, her eyes dark and hollow. "He's not dead," she said, her voice barely audible. "He's alive." Jared's entire world tilted. The pieces of the puzzle finally snapped into place. Cassandra had been working with someone powerful. Someone with resources. Someone who had a reason to want Alexis gone. Jared's hands clenched into fists. Cassandra had been right. The real enemy had been closer than they thought all along.